Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for October 31st, 2017. On this Halloween edition of Slash Film Daily, we're not going to be doing any news. We're just going to dive into Stranger Things 2 and give you our reactions and have a spoiler-filled discussion of the sequel. So if you have not seen Stranger Things 2, you may want to turn this off now. Keep this until you are finished your binge. And yes, enjoy. This is Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film senior writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's up?
And Slash Film writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Okay, guys, so all three of us have collectively binged. Actually, before this is going on, it's kind of late where you are in Philly, Chris, and you mentioned that you might have trick-or-treaters. So how is that going to affect this podcast?
Yes, well, I just put a bowl on my front porch on a table with a sign that says "Help yourself." So I'm hoping that will take care of things while we're recording, but we'll see how that goes.
How does that usually work in your neighborhood? Will kids just take the whole bowl?
I've never actually done it before. Actually, one year, because my wife and I got married right before Halloween, we went on our honeymoon on Halloween. I actually left a bowl on our porch then that said "Help yourself" when we left, and when we came back, it was empty. So I'm assuming it worked, but I'm hoping it's not like one kid shows up and takes all of it, but we'll see.
I feel like if you were a cheapskate, you could just get away with putting a bowl with that sign and never actually putting any candy in. And
it's true.
And
then I tried.
Yeah. Anyways, okay, let's get on to Stranger Things. Before we get into Stranger Things 2, I thought it would be best for us to give our thoughts on the first season. I'll go first. I love Stranger Things 1. I'm a person who grew up on Goonies and all the kind of films that I feel like this is that series was paying an homage to. For many years, I was kind of bummed out that we couldn't get movies with kids in danger without having, that the Race to Witch Mountain remake. The Rock was all of a sudden the star because you can't sell it with just the kids. But I kind of love that it was this. It was, what it was this year in theaters. And it was more than just nostalgia. The characters were really good. The mythology was really compelling. I was really all in. It wasn't like, my favorite TV show of the year that would go to Westworld, but it was up there. Chris, how about you?
I'm the same. I loved the first season of Stranger Things. I got a screener of the entire first season like weeks before it came out, and this was before there was any real buzz about it. And I just didn't really even know what it was going to be like, and it really impressed me. It's actually one of my the first season at least, is actually one of my favorite Netflix shows. I grew up on Steven Spielberg and Stephen King. Those are like the two things that, most influenced me when I was growing up. And that's exactly what that first season is basically riffing on. It's like combining King and Spielberg into one show. And I don't know, just watching it made me very nostalgic, but not in the way where I thought the show was only about nostalgia. I really actually cared about the characters. I cared about the story, and I was really impressed with it. So I was very excited for season 2.
Yeah, I think both of you said it very well. I echo all of those thoughts. I think the first season surprised the hell out of me, and I fell in love with the characters just like everybody else. I think that was the best part of it. And I grew up as somebody who didn't even watch the Goonies until I was, 30 years old, and hated it the first and only time I've seen it. So I feel like there's, I know that's a controversial statement, but I feel like there's, it's not just people who love the Goonies who automatically love Stranger Things, I guess is the point I'm trying to make.
Oh yeah, and I think the first season of Stranger Things, a lot of people I think kind of, compare the Amblin-esque Steven Spielberg aspects to it, but it's more Stephen King than Steven Spielberg, I feel.
Yeah, that's probably true.
I just want to weigh in here and say that I too am not a big fan of the Goonies. I was when I was a kid, and I rewatched it years later, and I was like, oh my God, why won't these kids shut up? They're constantly talking. I am, however, a huge fan of the Monster Squad, which is pretty much like the Goonies but with monsters. So
yes.
So I'm a much bigger fan of that.
I actually want to revisit that. I have not seen that in many years. But let's get on to Stranger Things 2. I was probably more hyped up about this than any movie this year other than Star Wars. And, finally getting to see it this weekend, it was a mixture of enjoyment and disappointment in equal measures. I think I enjoyed my time with these characters, and new and old, mostly. And I just don't like. The weird thing is, I expected to enjoy the mythology that this was taking and the adventure that it was going to go on, and I feel like that's where I kind of did not enjoy this show as much. What are your overall general reactions, Ben?
I agree. I think I also really like the character stuff for the most part. I have some qualms that I'll get into a little bit later on with some decisions that certain characters make, but the way that the storyline sort of splintered the cast, I thought was just not quite as enjoyable as the first season. And I understand that, like, from a creative perspective, you don't want to just remake the same thing that worked, but I feel like there's a line difference there between retreading and giving the audience what they want, and then just sort of blowing everything up from the inside out. And I feel like that's the latter is sort of what happened with Stranger Things too. It's like they saw the success of the first season and just decided to go just take everything into 180, and some of the character interactions with the kids and stuff feel sort of the same, and that's where I liked the show the best, I guess, in season 2. But as for the overall story, I wasn't too crazy about it. Chris, what did you think?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat where I don't want to say I don't care about the mythology, but I feel like the mythology is the least interesting part of the show. And this season was like all in on mythology. And what I care most about is these characters. And I really didn't like how the characters were split up. It felt a lot to me like that Netflix Arrested Development season where all the actors were too busy to appear together. So they kept like splitting them up into their own storylines. That's what this felt like to me. And
it's also the Empire Strikes Back method of a sequel of let's split them all up and have their own adventures and do some interesting pairings as well.
Right, and like Ben said, I understand the need not to just rehash and like basically remake the first season, but it seems like they went too far. They tried to be a little too different, and the core element of all those characters acting together, we didn't really get that until like the last 3 or 4 episodes, and I wanted more of that.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the story. The story was a really slow build. I think I was in episode 4 or maybe 5, and I was like, nothing has really happened. In terms of there was pumpkins being destroyed, and there was Will seeing his visions of the shadow monster, and there was obviously, who was it, Dustin that got the little slug creature thing?
Yep.
Yeah. But aside from that, it was all kind of character stuff, all kind of like catching us up to where we needed to be. And I feel like I haven't rewatched season 1, but I feel like by episode 4 or 5 in season 1, it was like really the plot was getting very exciting at that point. Did you guys have any problems with the momentum of the story?
For me, I feel like I enjoyed the earlier episodes when, with that stuff you were just talking about, Peter, like the pumpkins and sort of like, the introductions of the new characters, which we can talk about in a second. I was sort of more on board with it. And, while Will was having his visions and stuff, and I feel like the point where it sort of, maybe started to lose me a little bit was when Will gets, I guess, inhabited by the shadow monster, the mind flayer, because it seemed like that. I guess the visions of the Upside Down were such a a prominent part of Stranger Things in the first season, And we didn't really get that many of them in season 2 because they sort of tease this huge creature and then it just becomes Will basically for most of the season. And I just wasn't as engaged with that with that particular plot line, and that seems to be like the driving force of what's going on in Hawkins. And then there is like a little bit of splintering off from there. But I mean, I liked it in the beginning, like the first few episodes. I was in again, and then all of a sudden, the momentum sort of came to a halt, especially in episode 7, which I know we'll talk about later on. But Chris, what did you think about the pacing?
Yeah, I was okay with the pacing at first because I thought it actually was like building to something, and like you, once I realized it wasn't going where I thought it was going, I like reflexively, like looking back at the first few episodes, I'm like, oh, I don't like them as much now. Like I like the mood they set, I like the atmosphere they set, but yeah, it's a lot of build up for like not a lot of payoff. Like I don't really get what the whole motives are for the shadow monster. It just seems weird to me that this giant monster would even want to just become like a small boy. Like that just seems really like, why would you, like, he's already a big monster. Wouldn't he want to just stay like that? And I don't get what his motives were other than, destruction, I guess. It's just, I feel like they sort of like written themselves into like a corner with the Upside Down, in that everything that comes out of it is just this mean monster, but there's no like more, there needs to be more to it than that, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, it seems to me that the shadow monster was in the advertisements as being the big bad of this season, but it seemed like it was a bait and switch. It was really these demi dogs, or is that what they're calling them? Mm-hmm. Demo dogs.
Dogs.
Yeah. And the shadow monster was kind of, I think, the build up for next season or the next 2 seasons of this show. It seems like, we have not seen the end of the shadow monster. One of the things and by the way, I want to say, when I said that the pacing for the first few episodes was slower, I did enjoy it because it was more character oriented, but it was just interesting when I remember watching, I think, episode 5, and I was like, it just occurred to me, I was like, nothing really has happened yet. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was just kind of a strange feeling. One thing I did not like, episode 2, we finally, get the return of 11, played by Millie Bobby Brown. And in last season, she was kind of left in the Upside Down, right? And I assumed that this season was going to be about the kids trying to rescue her from the Upside Down, kind of like they were trying to rescue Will in the first season. I guess that would have been repeating yourself. But in episode 2 of the series, basically they reveal that, moments after the end of last season, she was able to escape the Upside Down and has been living with Hopper this whole time. Mm-hmm. I don't know. That seems like a cop-out to me, because it seems like and this happens with a lot of TV shows where they have like this really dramatic season finale, which seems like it's going to switch up everything. And then in the first 2 episodes of the next season, it's like, no, the status quo is back to normal. Or do you know what I mean? Like, it's like they painted themselves in the corner and they easily got out of it. It brings to mind, not to ruin Mad Men at all for anybody who has not watched Mad Men, but there is a season finale in Mad Men where one of the characters quits the ad agency that is the central part of this whole TV show. And then the next season starts up with basically them starting up their own ad agency with all the people from the former ad agency. And it's basically, it just could have been the same thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, nothing changed, really. It didn't really change the status quo too much. Same with Friday Night Lights. I want to give another example. The coach leaves one high school for another, and it just so happens that a bunch of the kids come with him. So it does change the situation slightly because it's a much different school. But did you guys have a problem with this, with 11's return in this?
I didn't have a problem with her getting out of the Upside Down on her own. I do think it was very anticlimactic because she, in the episode you're talking about, she's in the Upside Down for like 3 minutes, if that, and then she just finds like a hole and is instantly out. I was like, oh, I thought it was going to be like a little more difficult than that. And like, I get the idea to get her back into the real world and start, I guess the storyline they wanted, but it seemed like there should have been at least maybe like a full episode where she's trying to get out, and they didn't even give that. She's in it for a few minutes and then she's instantly out. And I did think that was just a little too easy.
I think I was okay with the way that they handled that. I don't know. I wasn't as sensitive to those particular concerns as you guys were, but I think, because I think I liked the 11 Hopper storyline, but I think I wish that could have been, the first 3 or 4 episodes or something, and then episode 5 or early on in the middle of the season is when she could have finally reunited with everyone instead of holding that all the way back, because I feel like that dynamic, her working with the guys and Dustin and Mike and everybody, I feel like that's the source of the magic of season 1 for me. So keeping her separate from the rest of the kids was a big part of my sort of, I don't want to say I'm overall negative on the show, but I definitely did not like season 2 as much as season 1, and I think that's a big part of why.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor this, but I was also annoyed that after they, have Eleven's return to the series, we're then treated with flashbacks of how she got there, and the flashbacks in this season were really annoying to me. Sometimes later in the season, they would have flashbacks of things that happened, a minute ago. Like, 11 remembering things that happened in that episode and stuff. And it's just, I know it was being used as a device, but I don't know. I just found it a little bit annoying. But let's move on from 11. Let's talk about the returning characters a bit. What do you guys think of Winona Ryder's Joyce Byers character? I feel like in the first season I was quite annoyed at her. In this season I enjoyed her more because she was a little bit less manic. She was a little bit more supporting of where I wanted the plot to go, and not the roadblock. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I felt like she was a person this time instead of a human scream like she was the first season, basically. So yeah, I definitely appreciated the work she did a little bit more. I mean, I liked her performance in season 1, but she was not asked to do much other than just, keep the dial all the way up to 11. Oh, well, I got 11 on in season 1. And this season, it felt like she was able to sort of bring it down to a more human level. So I definitely appreciated that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to ever speak ill of Winona Ryder because I love Winona Ryder, but the first season, I just don't think she had a handle on what the character was. And I think that was like a script issue because she just wasn't really well written. So she just basically played the character, as constantly out of her mind, which, I mean, it sort of makes sense because her son is missing and all that stuff, but it was just too much. Whereas it's much more level-headed in this season. I mean, she's manic here too, but it makes more sense, I guess, or maybe she found the way to play the part better this time. I'm not really sure how to put my finger on it, but it worked. I felt like it worked better this season than it did the first season.
Mm-hmm.
How about David Harbour as Jim Hopper? I feel like, it's a dream team. Him and 11, it should be great. But I feel like for much of the season, it was, him being the father figure telling her no, and it was not as enjoyable as I wanted it to be. It came around, but what do you guys think?
I was good with that whole thing. I wish that, again, that 11 had been reunited with the guys a little bit sooner, but I really loved the father-daughter dynamic that they had going, sort of. That was the one part of the season that I felt like the separation actually worked, because it was that sort of interesting pairing that you were talking about earlier, Peter. I feel like those two actors work really well together, and sort of play off of each other in interesting ways. And so I was hooked on their whole thing, and I thought it worked wonders for both of the characters and their sort of growth and forward momentum as characters and as people in this overall narrative. So I was pretty pleased with all of that stuff. And I think maybe I would have liked to seen him, punch a few more people, because I think that was a really enjoyable part of season 1. And I don't know if he punched anybody in season 2, but that seemed like a character trait in season 1 almost that seemed to disappear as this story went on. But yeah, I liked it. What did you think, Chris?
Yeah, I had no problems with that at all. I mean, he's a great actor. I love the way he plays that character. Like you said, I love the way he and Millie Bobby Brown work together. Like, one of my favorite moments in season 2 is just that scene where they're literally just cleaning up the cabin. Like, and that has nothing to do with the plot at all, but I just love that little moment, the way that's handled. And I also love late in the season where they're trying to explain Dungeons and Dragons rules to him, and he's not having any of it. Like, I was just like cracking up at that.
I kind of wonder, I often watch these kind of things, and I think as a screenwriter of like how it could have been better, which I know is probably not the way to think as a reviewer of content. But I kind of wonder if it would have been better if they had played Hopper off. As, at the end of last season, we saw him kind of working with the Department of Energy. Like, there's some kind of, something going on. And this season, like, him kind of, like, telling the kids to let it go about 11 and, like, not showing 11 until, episode 5, 6, or possibly 7. And actually having the reveal there that he had, been harboring her that entire time. And that, like, we think the whole time that, like, he's kind of a bad guy working with them. But then we wouldn't have got all the 11 Harbour, Yeah,
it's like a tough line, because I'm sure on one level they knew if they kept 11 out of the season for so long, fans would just be like, "Where's 11?" So I guess they tried to like split hairs in a way and just like withhold her for a little bit, and then you have that reveal at the end of that one episode. But I actually agree that if they had withheld her for maybe like 2 or 3 more episodes and then made that reveal, it would have had maybe a little bit more impact.
What other of the cast do you guys want to talk about? Is there anybody specifically from returning cast that?
Yes. I have one. So this is the thing that I alluded to earlier, where it was a character decision that I thought did not work very well, and that is Gaten Mazzaro as Dustin finding D'Artagnan, the little Demogorgon creature. I think that the show basically forces Dustin to do things that are wildly out of character just to move that storyline along. Knowing how in tune he is with the rules of Dungeons and Dragons, knowing that he and his friends faced down a Demogorgon at the end of the previous season, and that one of his best friends in the world was trapped in this alternate dimension, for him to just blindly accept this thing as a pet and hope that everything turns out well just seemed insane to me. I was like, Dustin, you're smarter than this. Why is this happening? Did you guys find that to be a troubling thing for you, or were you fine with that as a character move for him?
Yeah, I definitely had a problem with that. He just basically the script forced him to become like a jerk, basically, and put all his friends in danger, and I didn't really like that at all. It doesn't fit with who that character is.
Yeah.
Friends don't lie. And any other returning characters? Should we talk about? You know what? Let's talk about Justice for Barb, because last season, Barb, had her untimely death in the Upside Down, and fans were upset that she didn't get her due, and I feel like the Duffer Brothers heard all this criticism, and they're like, let's make a whole subplot of this season around Justice for Barb. And I feel like that's one of the weak points of the season, is like, I didn't need this much Justice for Barb. What about you guys?
I like the setup of it. I like the idea that what's her name, Nancy, has like guilt over it. I liked that. But they sort of just forget about it until like the last episode. Then like there's that shot where like it's Barb's funeral, and it's like they set it up and they didn't really do anything with it. So I didn't mind it, but it wasn't
they're exposing the Department of Energy for her benefit.
Right, yes. Right. But even that seemed like almost like an afterthought. Like you just get like someone like it's like a news report at the end saying something, because like even that they sort of just gave up on. So.
And by the way, one of my most hated characters of the season probably is that guy, the investigator. I forget the actor who plays him.
But Brett Gelman?
Yeah, he's just too comic relief for this movie. Like, you get into his bunker, and he's one of those stereotypical guys with, the strings on the, from photograph to photograph on his walls, and it's just so unbelievable. And I feel like season 1, if it had a character like that, you would not believe it. It was more in that world, and this felt like a TV movie character.
Man, I gotta disagree, Peter. I love that character. I think the whole Justice for Barb thing, because it doesn't really harp on Barb herself that much. I think it was worth it because it brought that character into the mix, because I really liked his comic relief. I thought he had the best joke of the whole series with that, with referencing the pull-out couch for Jonathan, that little double entendre
that was
there.
Good. Yeah.
And I think he's the kind of character. Him and the kid who works at the arcade, I thought were two of the best sort of expansion characters that they brought in to make the world feel a little bit bigger than it was in the first season. And I thought they both worked really well for the time period that they were supposed to be in. I think we'll talk about episode 7 pretty shortly, I think, but that whole divergence I did not think worked very well. But I think those characters and how they were, sort of more directly tied to the characters that we know and Hawkins, Indiana, the location itself. I thought that all of that stuff worked pretty well, and I was pleased that there wasn't too much of the Barb stuff, but I thought they sort of struck a decent balance there. But I don't know, that's just me. Chris, what did you think about Brett Gelman and that whole thing?
I didn't mind him. I mean, I thought he was amusing. He wasn't like my favorite part of the show, but he didn't bother me as much as he bothered Peter, apparently.
I don't know. It just seemed too jokey for the show, but maybe it's just me. When we're talking about new characters, we have to talk about Max, Mad Max, who is one of the biggest new characters added to the series. Sadie Sink. What do you guys think of the addition of Max to this group of kids?
Chris, go ahead.
She was fine. Of the two main new characters, Max and her brother Billy, I honestly don't think they added that much to the show. Like, especially Billy, which I guess we'll talk about. But for now, Max, I liked the little subplot she had with her relationship with Lucas. I thought that was fine, but I really didn't think she added much to the show. And at the end, like, I don't really care if she comes back, basically. Like, the first season, all of those characters, I was like, all right, I can't wait to see what happens to them in the second season. But, like, Max, like, if season 3 started and they were like, Max moved away, I'd be like, all right, that's fine.
Yes.
So you were basically 11 when, she goes to shake 11's hand and 11 just walks by her.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I was like, good, I agree, yeah.
You did the Princess Leia to shoot Chewbacca in Force Awakens.
I agree. I think the only reason for Max to exist is for 11 to see her and Mike in that gym in that moment and misinterpret the situation. I feel like dramatically that is her only real purpose in the new season. I mean, I guess there's a relationship with Lucas there, but that didn't even feel particularly well fleshed out to me. And I agree with Chris. If she's gone next season, I would be totally fine with that.
I mean, maybe they're building her up for a love triangle kind of storyline in the future, possibly. I mean, they were obviously doing that, teasing that a little bit in this one. I very much hated her brother in that whole storyline.
So did you hate him in the way that you're supposed to hate him? Or
Both.
Did you hate him beyond that and, like, you actually hated the fact that you even had to watch him and that the character was in the show at all? Because he's clearly a character that's supposed to be hated.
Yeah. I would say both. What are your feelings on this character? He just seems so unnecessary, and it seems so by the numbers, I want to say.
I mean, yeah, like, I felt like there was a little bit of of like the show attempting to introduce some racism into it, you know, with like he clearly doesn't like Lucas because he's a black kid, not just because he's a kid who's hanging out with his little stepsister or whatever. And I think, you know, they didn't quite go as far as they could have with that. I think he's, you know, comically over the top as far, you know, in every regard, basically. He is like the stereotypical 80s bully, you know, from a Karate Kid or whatever, like turned all the way up, you know, as far as the dial can go. I loved the scene in the last episode with him and I think it's Nancy's mom. Because that scene is so ridiculous that it almost plays as like a fantasy in her head. She was reading like a romance novel in the bath, and she comes down and he like is like borderline seducing her. And I thought that worked really well. And I thought that was like that character or that actor. I think his name is Dacre Montgomery. He was in the new Power Rangers movie earlier this year. I thought that was like the best thing that he did in the whole season, and the rest he was just like sort of a stereotypical bully. But Chris, did that character work for you at all?
No, not at all. Part of it is, you know, like you said, you're supposed to hate him, but the performance was just, it was too much for me. Like I kept waiting for some sort of like reveal that character is on like cocaine or something, because he's so insane. Like he's too insane. Like there's a part early in the season where he almost runs over the kids, and it's like I don't know, I just thought that was like way too much. Like he's too much of like he goes beyond being a bully. He's like a psychopath, and you know, that's fine, I guess, if you want to flesh it out more, but the show never does much more with it. And at the end, he's just sort of like still hanging around, like, all right, nothing. Like, yeah. I mean, Max has that moment where she, you know, triumphs over him, I guess, but it seems like kind of like an empty win. Like that's not going to change the fact that he's crazy. So
right. I don't know, Chris, I'm interested in your reaction to this, because it seemed very much like Billy was a villain in the Stephen King mold. He felt like a Henry Byers, I think, or Henry Bowers character from It. And, you know, like those characters aren't necessarily always fully fleshed out or explained. They just sort of are psychos that are there to terrorize the protagonist. So it's interesting to hear, you know, such a hardcore Stephen King fan sort of come down a little bit more negatively on that character when those types of character archetypes exist so prevalently in Stephen King's work.
Yeah, but I Stephen King has like a better way of like making the characters seem more fleshed out than they are. It's like this like secret only he knows how to do really well. I can't really explain it, but yeah, it didn't work for me like it should have.
Another new character this season, I think, is in a way responsible for another part of the reason I was disappointed with the season. That is Dr. Owens, played by Paul Reiser, because last season basically the Department of Energy was kind of the bad guys, and you know, they knew more than we knew. And this season, you know, they let us into their lab, and you know, there was more nefarious things going on behind the scenes. You know, they're watching well, things are not going as they think they're going, but in the end, they just seem like a bunch of baffling buffoon scientists that don't know what to do other than we need to burn it. And I think Paul Reiser's Dr. Owens really is reflective of that. What do you guys think of Dr. Owens and also, you know, his laboratory? It feels like I didn't want the mystery to be revealed with that. I wanted to think that they knew more about this than they do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I feel like that's exactly how it was in the first season, where you were constantly trying to catch up and sort of uncover the truth of how far this conspiracy goes and like what exactly they know, and, you know, are they responsible for it? What's happening here? And this, it seems like Paul Reiser's character is sort of like one of us, like just sort of wandering in, and you're meant to not exactly trust him as the season begins because of his association with that company and you know, the lab and all that stuff, and what we've seen there and what we saw Eleven go through there. But it really, I was sort of expecting a twist or some sort of reveal that, you know, all of the meetings that he was taking with Will and and Winona Ryder's character, Joyce, that they were, he was like covering for something, or like there was more going on with that character than what it actually was, which is basically just him, being a guy who is, he works for the company and he ends up being like a pretty decent guy in the end, but there's not really a lot there with him. I was a little disappointed with that.
But by the way, also there's this scene where they're giving a PowerPoint, or not PowerPoint, some kind of slideshow of Will's brain. And, all the people, all the doctors are around this desk with like these printouts of the brain activity in Will. And it just felt like an SNL sketch. It did not feel like this show. It just felt like so below what those characters should be doing and the intelligence that should be in that realm of this world. Chris, did you have any problems with this?
I actually liked this character. I don't know if it's because I just liked the way Paul Reiser played the character, but I like the idea that it subverts where you think it's going. I like the idea that you're supposed to think, oh, this guy's going to turn out to be evil, but he actually just turns out to be kind of a nice guy. And I think that ties into season 1 a little bit with the character of Steve, where he's sort of set up to be this jerk boyfriend archetype character, but he actually turns out to be much better than that, especially in this season where he gets much more to do. But I kind of liked that you're meant to think he's evil, and then he turns out to be not evil after all. That didn't bother me. I thought that was a nice twist on the character, especially since he's played by Paul Reiser, who plays sort of a similar character in Aliens, where you start out thinking he's like a nice guy, and then he turns out to be like a jerk working for the company who wants to, capture the alien.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think the shining star out of all the new characters is clearly Bob, played by Sean Astin, of Goonies fame. He, I don't know, I just feel like I wanted more with him. He was not as big of a part as I thought he was going to be in this series, but when he was there, it was, I always cared, and I always, there were some great moments, like that whole hospital or escape sequence, which is just one of the best, I feel like, action sequences in this season. Ben, your thoughts on Bob?
I liked him a lot. He is basically the definition of normcore. He's like the most basic dude that you can possibly imagine. And I think that is exactly what Joyce was looking for in the wake of this, super traumatic event that happened to her at the end of the first season, with her son going through this crazy thing. So that character made complete sense to me. I think he worked really well. I think the only thing that I was a little disappointed about with him was just sort of how predictable that plot line was. His story was, you could sort of call everything that was going to happen to him in those final moments, minutes before it actually happened. And the only reason I was like, maybe he's not going to die was because I was like, Joyce has already been through a lot as a character. I don't know if the show would actually do that to her. But then you sort of think about like how, she's probably going to end up with Hopper at some point in the, before the whole series is over. And it's like, well, I guess they're not going to bring Sean Astin back for another season to pay him to come back. So I guess they're probably going to wipe him out here. And that ended up happening. So, yeah, I thought he did a really good job, and that character, just sort of exudes the goofy, normal dad kind of vibe that they were really looking for there.
We should also talk about Will as the spy. We mentioned that earlier, that Will had kind of that the Shadow Monster had infiltrated Will, and by the way, that episode is called The Spy. And when Will tells them where to go, I was instantly like, the episode's called The Spy. Will's the spy. Like, the episode spoiled me on that moment, way before the reveal of that moment. Did that happen to either of you?
No, not really. I didn't really pay much attention to the character or the episode titles, I guess, until afterwards.
Chris, it didn't bother you at all? Didn't have
I guess I sort of saw it coming, but it didn't bother me, I guess. I was like...
The other weird thing is, it seems weird that they have this spy in their midst, and he's somehow giving them like Morse code messages, which the Shadow Monster can't see the Morse code. I don't know why. Why wouldn't the Duffer Brothers have used the spy in a way where, you know, they give Will information they know is false to trick the Shadow Monster or the demi-dogs into a situation based on the false information, using him against the Shadow. Do you know what I mean? Like, it seems like a situation that was not even paid off, really, in as much as just for that surprise that, you know, all the scientists were killed.
Yeah, there wasn't really much there with that whole thing, and that's sort of my problem with the Shadow Monster, which is such a cool design for a character and something that feels very much in tune with the sort of you know, spooky elements of the Upside Down. Just getting like sidelined into a character that we already know. And I mean, poor Noah Schnapp, the actor, he just like was strapped to a bed or strapped to a pole or whatever for like the whole season. It felt like, you know, he was just like, I thought this was going to be the season where he was normal again and like teamed up with his friends, and like maybe he is like a key part in solving whatever mystery they're working on or whatever. Like he's just one of the normal kids again, but it turns out that he is like the focal point of this whole thing again. And that I was just like, man, I feel bad for this kid because he just like has so much trauma now. But yeah, I was a little unsure of how the mechanics of that whole Morse code sequence were working, and I just think that whole subplot did not work as well as they wanted it to.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really know what the Shadow Monster even wanted, really. I don't understand that creature's motivations, and I agree that whatever happens with season 3, they need to have it not focus on Will, because it's going to get ridiculous if every season something terrible is happening to this kid. Like someone needs to cut him a break for season 3.
Okay, guys, we've been alluding to this whole podcast. We got to talk about Chapter 7, The Lost Sister, which seems to be everybody's least liked episode of not just this season, but of the series. It seems to, you know, just as momentum is finally building to a place that we're actually excited about what's going on, this chapter basically takes us out of this and gives us a side story that I don't think anybody wanted. I'm not sure really the purpose, other than for 11 to decide that she needs to be there with her friends. Ben, you wrote a whole article on this on slashfilm.com, comparing this to your worries for Star Wars Last Jedi.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. Chris talked about it in his spoiler review of the season, so I want to hear what Chris has to say in a second. But I really like the idea of building out the mythology and finding out more about Eleven's backstory. I just think this was a really, really terrible way to go about doing that, because as we've said over and over again, and we've hammered it home, the reason that Stranger Things works so well is because we love these characters. And for 11 to be separated from the characters we love, not only separated from the characters we love, but also sucked into this group of characters that are nowhere near as compelling or interesting for an entire episode. And it felt like this was a huge misfire. So I'm not really sure what they were doing there. It was like, and Chris talks about this in his review, where it sort of feels like a backdoor pilot almost for a separate show. I have no idea if that's what the Duffer Brothers are actually intending to do there, but I really hope not, because I would absolutely not watch that show. But it did make me think about Star Wars The Last Jedi, which is, specifically because you have a female protagonist in 11 who is separated from the dynamic that worked so well the first time around, and completely, pushed away from the main action. And that's been something that I've been, slightly worried about with The Last Jedi, with Rey, where she and Finn played off each other so well in The Force Awakens, and she's going to be off training with Luke and, doing her own thing for a majority of the movie, or that's what it seems like anyway. I'm not crazy about the idea of franchises in general building fantastic chemistry with different dynamics of characters, and then just ripping those apart just for the sake of switching things up or whatever. It's like that's part of why people are coming back, is to see that dynamic play out again. And I just think episode 7 of Stranger Things 2 is like one of the worst examples of how that can go really terribly. But Chris, what did you think?
Wait, before we get to Chris, I just want to say, last season of Stranger Things, a lot of people gave it a lot of flack for being just kind of nostalgia, just ripping off all these Stephen King, Steven Spielberg movies and that whole thing. And I think the Duffer Brothers even acknowledged that when, Lucas tells Max the story of what happened last season, and she kind of gives her critique of it being unoriginal and whatever. It's obviously a nod to the reviews, the bad negative reviews from last season. And this season, I feel like they did try to do something different and it didn't work. This is as different as you could possibly get for the series. I didn't want to see the city. I want to stay in Hawkins. Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, pretty much what you both said is how I feel. This made me angry. This was like one of those episodes of like later seasons of Lost where they set up like a big cliffhanger and then they immediately focus on something completely different to just draw it out. And it sort of worked fine with Lost, but for this, it was just like, I don't care about any of these characters. Like, they're very generic punk rock characters. They're from like RoboCop, like they're extras from RoboCop just wandering around. And it really bugged me. It especially bugged me being so late in the season. It's like the third to last episode. Right when things are really heating up back in Hawkins, they immediately jump to, I think it's like Pittsburgh, and it's like, who cares? Why are we spending so much time with these people?
I think it's Chicago.
Chicago. Yeah, and it makes no sense. And like the whole reason exists is to have 11 be like, oh, I want to be with my friends, but she's felt like that the entire season. Like her whole arc this season is how she wants to get out of the cabin and reunite with her friends. Like we didn't really need an episode where she takes like a road trip to learn that. It just, and I'm all for learning more about her backstory, but there was a better way to do it than this.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem, right? Is that it seems like from the very beginning of her arriving there and you realizing the moral compasses that these characters have and 11, the one that 11 has, are on, completely opposite ends of the spectrum. So that they're not going to be able to meet in the middle. That this is going to be a brief interaction, and it's just like, 10 minutes into the episode, you're like, oh man, I know what's going to happen here. We're going to spend this entire episode there, and then she's going to leave. So it just feels like a waste of time. I was not a fan.
And we didn't learn much. You mentioned Lost, but it brought to mind, and I know that this is probably a more funny, worse example, is, when South Park had that huge cliffhanger, and then the next episode where they were going to answer the big question, I forget what it was, something about Cartman's mom.
Who is Cartman's father or something like that?
It was Terrence and Phillip. The whole episode was, a complete bait and switch, and it felt like that, even though this still had characters that we wanted to see, kind of. It felt like a complete bait and switch. By the way, we haven't talked about this yet, but, we're seeing in this season, I don't believe it was in last season, 11 goes into this state where she's like in this like black void with water. Was that in last season at all?
Oh yeah, that was there. That was a big part of season 1. I think I think at the end of season 1, she's like in a pool in the gym, and she is laying there, like a kiddie pool kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think she goes into it there. And I think when she was in the tank, in the lab, like that was like the whole way of the.
It was the same aesthetic as that.
Yeah.
Okay,
same,
I'm totally
like,
forgetting.
Under the skin kind of vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was going to criticize it for ripping under the skin, but apparently I already did that, and I forgot about that. Let's talk about the climax of this season, because I feel like the climax of the season was rather disappointing. It was very filled with CG. They're shooting at a void. Hopper's on this thing shooting while 11 is just, doing her Jedi Mind Force thing on the thing. And like, what do you guys think? Like, was there anything to enjoy in that climax?
Chris, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, it was entertaining. I wouldn't call it memorable, really. Like, it's one of those things. Like, I kind of forgot about it as soon as it was over. I did like a little there was like a little character moment afterward where after 11 shuts the Upside Down, I guess, whatever she does, where Hopper tells her she did a good job. Like, I liked that because it was like a little quiet character moment. Like, stuff like that works for me more than like the action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just disappointed that it seemed like there was, in the end of season 1, it's like they go head to head against the Demogorgon, and it feels like there's real danger there. It feels like that thing is running through the hallways and murdering people left and right, and you feel like those characters, the characters that you love, could die at any second. And this, it feels like 11 didn't even face off against the shadow monster. It was just her closing a portal, and I guess the shadow monster was driven out of Will in that sequence where they sort of turn up the heat on him. But even that I was expecting that to happen, and then 11 to have to face off against this thing in some sort of significant way. And it was like, it was just trapped behind the portal, and it barely even tried to do anything. It just seemed very anticlimactic to me.
On the other side of that coin, the 80s middle school movie dance ending was so cute and so wonderful, and it almost makes me wish that this whole ending took place at the dance. Do you know what I mean? Like, put it in those in that kind of situation rather than this where it was. But it reminded me of some of the best high school movies of like the 80s. What did you guys think of that the ending?
Yeah, I liked all that stuff. I thought Dustin's hair was ridiculous, and his relationship with Steve as the season goes on is one of the high points for me. I think Joe Keery did a really good job this season, sort of fleshing that character out from the stupid bully that he was in the beginning of season 1. He's become sort of a fan favorite, I think.
Yeah, I agree. The whole dance thing was it was like touching. It was a very emotional sort of ending. It actually just makes me want the show to just be about these kids just hanging out at this point. Like, I don't really care if anything supernatural happens to them anymore. I kind of just like the dynamic of them just being friends. Like, we don't need any more of the Upside Down as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I'm interested, Peter, what did you think about the very last shot? So it zooms out of the dance and you see the gym, and then the camera flips over and you see the shadow monster sort of hovering over the upside down version of the gym, and then it cuts to credits. What did you think about that?
It was not nearly as cool as the end credit sequence for the last season. Like, that felt more like an 80s horror movie end credit sequence. This just felt like, oh, we're teasing next season, and it really didn't tell us anything. Why is the shadow monster only obsessed with these kids? I don't understand it. It doesn't, like, the rules of the first season made sense. The rules for the Upside Down, the rules for the Demogorgon, like, everything that we learned kind of made sense. And in this season, it doesn't make any sense. I don't understand what happened. What are these Demogor dogs or whatever they're called? Like, what is going on? Do either of you know what happened?
No,
I guess not. It's weird that at the 50-minute mark of a podcast where we've been talking about this whole season, for you to say, do either of you know what happened, and both of us to say no. But I guess I don't really when it comes down to that.
What were the tunnels underneath the town? Like,
I think that's like the Upside Down is spreading. That's what I thought it was, but
yeah,
I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's what's his name? Paul Reiser's character was not aware that the opening was underneath the Department of Energy building. It was going so far down and sort of seeping out into the town. I think that's why those tunnels formed, was because they weren't aware of the extent to which the portal was growing. So I think that's the answer to that.
Okay, so what is the grand plan? What was the purpose? What was the Shadow Monster trying to do in this season?
I don't know. I don't know the answer. I guess they talk about it a little bit, where it's like the goal of the Dungeons and Dragons character is to take over a planet and like harvest it or something, and then move on to another one, like enslave a race or something. I think it's just sort of a generic, alien movie kind of plot, and I guess that works for Dungeons and Dragons, which is a game that sort of trades on those kinds of tropes. And it in the first season, the characters were creating analogs for Dungeons and Dragons characters, and that is how the audience understood the relationship between those characters. And I guess the same thing tried to happen here, but it wasn't quite as clear, because most of the time the shadow monster was inside Will. I feel like you could see what the Demogorgon was trying to do in the first season, because you watched the thing itself wander around and learn and make decisions and go after certain people or whatever. You could sort of get a sense of its goals and motivations. And like Chris has been saying, you don't really have that sense for the shadow monster in season 2, because you don't really get that many shots of it. I don't know if it was just too expensive to put the visual effects into creating that thing, or if they didn't want to give it a real personality, or if it's all some sort of setup for the third season. But I felt like the final shot of season 2, it was just this could have been the final shot of season 1. It felt like not a lot had progressed really in the grand scheme of the mythology side of things, because it's not like the creature was defeated. It's still there. It's just sort of hanging out in the Upside Down. I don't know.
I'll tell you one other thing, one very minor thing that bothered me is the walkie-talkies, guys. This show is supposed to be set in the 80s. So set it in the 80s. Don't give these kids cell phones for all intents and purposes. Do you know what I mean? They're able to contact each other no matter where they are. That's not how the 80s worked. The 80s worked. You called your friend's house, you talked to the mom, you left a message. Do you know what I mean? It's then you got to call back the next day. I know that's not cinematic, but I don't know. It just felt like this could have been set today with everybody with these walkie-talkies.
I think I don't know if that's fully true. I see what you're talking about, but I think there are enough moments, especially the ones where Lucas's little sister, comes into play. I think she's got to be a new fan favorite. She was great.
She's awesome.
I think it's Dustin is trying to get a hold of Lucas, over and over again, and he has a conversation with her, and he doesn't finally reach him, until hours later or whatever, because of that exact thing. So I think they try to have it a little bit both ways there.
I know we're wrapping this up. Let's talk about directors here. Obviously, the Duffer Brothers were in charge of overseeing the entire series and season, writing-wise. But they directed the first 2 episodes, and the last 2 episodes. The episodes 3 and 4 were directed by Sean Levy, who is as vanilla as you can possibly get. And I think Andrew Stanton, who is 5 and 6, that looked the most cinematic and most like a movie out of all the episodes for me. Episode 7, the most hated one, was by a woman named Rebecca Thomas, who did a 2009 Sundance Film Festival film, and she had a debut feature called Electric Children, which I have not seen, played at Berlin Film Festival. She's a big Mormon director. I'm wondering if the negative feedback on this film is going to negatively impact her career or not. And then
I was really disappointed to find out that she directed that episode, because I think everyone despises that episode, or everyone I've talked to anyway. And I was so bummed to find out that it was, that was this was her, her chance to sort of step into a big show and sort of boost her career a little bit. But she was in talks to direct Captain Marvel at one point. I think she's taken over the director's chair for this film called Intelligent Life that Colin Trevorrow was either wrote or was going to direct. So she seems like a director who's on her way up, and I would have loved for her to have directed an episode that everybody loved, but it's just unfortunate she ended up sort of getting saddled with the script for the one that everybody sort of hates.
Yeah, I'll say that the problems with that episode, they're not on a director level. They're definitely a script level. So I'm hoping she comes out of it okay, because that episode is actually kind of well directed. It has very cinematic moments in it, but the script is just so stupid you just forget about it.
Yeah, and I didn't mind Sean Levy's episodes, Peter. I didn't really find much of a...
I'm not saying they're bad. They're just kind of very, like, wide shot, singles. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's very, there's not much style to it. The Duffer Brothers have style. Andrew Stanton has style. Even when I don't like, the guy in the bunker, the investigator, he has this more comedic moments. Like, you could feel Andrew Stanton in those episodes. And Sean Levy just feels vanilla all the time. Chris, any thoughts on any of the directors?
I kind of feel like the show is so not, what's the word? It's not very episodic anymore. I mean, the first season wasn't very episodic either, but it was much more than this season. This season was literally just like a 9-hour movie. And I feel like if you're going to do that, you should probably just do what the first season of True Detective did, where you just get one director and have them direct the whole thing. So it just feels more coherent. I feel like you need to do either one or the other. You need to either make something episodic and give it multiple directors, or you need to just, if you're going to make it a big, long movie, you should just have one director with one vision. So that's my take on it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's end this podcast with Stranger Things 3. We know it's coming. They've already announced it. Not officially, but we know that there's 4 or 5 seasons planned, and obviously they're teasing it here. And how well it's done, there's no way it's not going to happen. So, what do you guys think is going to happen in Stranger Things 3? What do you guys want to see going forward in the series, and what do you guys not want to see? Let's go with Chris.
Chris, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't know what will happen. I do want them to get a little bit outside their comfort zone, I guess. But then again, when they did that, they gave us episode 7, and that didn't work out too well. But I feel like it needs to be more than just, the Upside Down is opening again. Like, it's just going to start getting repetitive if every season is pretty much that same sort of conflict where it's the Upside Down unleashing monsters. Like, I kind of feel like they need to jump ahead in time, and I kind of feel like they're going to have to do that because by the time they get around to shooting it, those kids are going to just look much older. I mean, you can even tell in this season where all their voices are starting to crack and stuff like that. You can just tell they're already getting older, and it's going to be very noticeable by the time the next season rolls around. So they should probably jump forward in history just a little bit. That's basically...
I think they are. I wrote a little bit in the a Stranger Things Bits article on the site yesterday where the producers were talking about how they aren't going to try to trick people into thinking that season 3 takes place, a few days after the events of season 2. They are going to jump ahead where it's been like another school year kind of thing. So I think that will put the younger kids as freshmen in high school and Nancy as a senior in high school, just to give everybody some perspective for where they're going to be in Stranger Things 3.
In Stranger Things 3, I would like to see the kids brought back together for a lot of the season. I'd like to see them go on an adventure, their own, Goonies-like adventure. For whatever reason, they can't trust the adults. Whatever reason, the adults can't be part of it. I want to see, obviously Department of Energy has been kind of disbanded. There's going to have to be this new government organization come in. Maybe have the adults, be dealing with that matter. But I want to see more ground level. I want to see more... not these big abstract things and people getting possessed by the Upside Down. I want to see demigorgons that are right in front of the kids and they have to fight them. And I also want to see these kids in high school. I think that would be great. So much of the show is in the enjoyment of the show is not. At least in season 2, is not that mythology. So I'm kind of, I was down for more mythology, and now I'm like, let's push it back on the mythology.
I think for me, if they are going to try to expand first of all, I wish they would just keep the whole thing in Hawkins, because I think that's a big part of the appeal of that sort of small town feeling. If they do decide to, spread the boundaries of the show a little bit, I hope that more, like the whole group of kids go, because then at least you'll have that dynamic in a new location instead of one person being separated from everybody else. And then I think from the mythology aspect, the Upside Down, I would love to see something in there that is not this malevolent evil. I would like to see maybe, some sort of good creature come out of there, and that could introduce a little bit of, make that whole thing a little bit more interesting, and instead of just this is this pit from which evil, arises every year or whatever. I think, I was speculating that there might be 2 shadow monsters from some of the trailer breakdowns that I was doing, and that didn't happen, but there very well could be some other force that's in maybe another area of the Upside Down. Maybe the kids have to go to, another state or something and go to the Upside Down there, and we see what that looks like, the Upside Down of Chicago or of a big city or something like that, where this other force might be. I don't know, I'm just spitballing, but that kind of thing might be a way to sort of keep things a little bit more interesting instead of just repeating the same sort of tropes over and over again.
I'm kind of wondering with them introducing Max, who's from California, if that was some kind of setup for a California trip or some kind, which could be interesting. Obviously they set up in this season, or even last season, that there's 9 other kids, at least 9 other kids. This season they went to Chicago to visit one of them, number 8, I believe, and which, by the way, it should have been 7 in Chapter 7, right? Like, why not? But should we see more of them? Should we explore more of these, X-Men-like powered kids?
No. I wouldn't mind it if they came to Hawkins. I wouldn't mind it. Like, if they came looking for, if it was like a homecoming sort of scenario where they were coming to find out more about their own past, I think I would be fine. But I think it's the combination of that sort of X-Men reject thing with a new location, with new characters, without all the other characters that we saw, that sort of was the perfect storm of badness for episode 7.
And Chris, you just don't want to see it at all.
No, I don't want to see those characters again. I don't want to spend any more time with them. Maybe like, I forget the character's name, but the main girl, maybe she can show up in town. The rest of them, I never want to see any of them.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't want to see them again, but like, other of the numbered characters, with maybe different powers or something like that. I think there's definitely potential to sort of, dig into the mythos a little bit there.
But by the way, if her sister, that girl, that main girl, can make people see whatever that she wants them to see, why does she build a wall so they can escape? Why doesn't she just make it look like another car is escaping in another direction and that they're invisible so they can... I don't know. It's just like, I feel like the rules of this do not make any sense. But
she's not as creative as you are, Peter. That's what it all boils down to, man.
So that does it for Stranger Things 2 review. And I want to say, guys, I did enjoy this season. As much as it sounded like this last hour has been kind of a complaining fest from all of us, and us, being very critical of the show. I do enjoy these characters. I do enjoy this world, and I do want to see more. It's just I was disappointed. Do you guys have any final thoughts on Stranger Things 2?
Yeah, I had a lot of problems with this season, but I still love the show. The first season is still great. I'm looking forward to season 3 whenever we get it. I'm just going to chalk this season up to like growing pains. Like they sort of stumbled upon a hit here. Like I don't think anyone involved with the show realized how big it was going to become. And once it became so big, there was a lot of pressure to sort of have lightning strike twice. So
yeah,
there's a
trick-or-treater. Yeah, I think
Ben, I know you are much more careful about what you watch and the quality of TV that you consume. So will Stranger Things 3 be something you will seek out?
Yes, absolutely. And I also want to echo your thoughts. I don't think this season was like a catastrophe on the level of True Detective season 2 or anything like that. It was just a little bit of a step down for me from what I considered to be a really, really terrific first season that set the bar extremely high. So it would have been tough for anybody to come up, to come back from that and match that level of quality in the second season. So I think they did relatively well, considering. I just wish, like some of the things we talked about, they could have fleshed out some things a little bit better and maybe kept the character dynamics, sort of more reflective of what happened in the first season. But hopefully they've gotten that part out of their system, and then the third season will sort of address some of those issues.
Okay, I think this might be the longest episode of Slash Film Daily in the history of Slash Film Daily. So we got to cut it off here. I want to thank everybody for listening. We are now in the top 4 on iTunes TV and Film Podcast. Please go to iTunes, give us a rating, give us a review. You can read more. You can read a ton about Stranger Things Season 2 and Season 3 on Slash Film. I'm going to link in the show notes all the articles we mentioned, including Chris's spoiler review, Ben's article on why Episode 7 makes him worried about Star Wars, and much, much more. You can find this podcast published every weekday on iTunes, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps. And I promise, tomorrow we will be back with a new episode with news and all the stuff you love. So we'll see you then.